As we head into the political battlefields of 2026, President Donald Trump is staring down a slew of politically loaded issues. The possibility that his signature economic policy might be overturned by the courts, rising healthcare costs for millions of Americans, and high-stakes foreign policy negotiations in Ukraine and Gaza. At the same time, Trump is facing plenty of political distractions, from looming government funding deadlines to the drip release of Jeffrey Epstein-related documents. Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. Will it be a good second year in office for the president? Joining me to dig into all of it is USA Today White House Correspondent Joey Garrison. It's good to have you back on the show, Joey.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Let's start with the issue that affects millions of Americans. That's health care. Costs are set to rise for millions as Obamacare subsidies expired on December 31st. Politically, how risky is that issue heading into a midterm year? What are the options on the table for Trump and the GOP, and how likely are they to fix this?
Yeah, it's very risky. So, healthcare premiums through the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare have now doubled for about 20 million Americans with the expiration of those Obamacare subsidies. There was a proposal from Democrats in Congress to extend those subsidies, but Republicans voted against it. And Republicans have opposed Obamacare for years, so it's been a struggle for many of them to try to embrace those subsidies. And now Congress, controlled by Republicans, as well as the White House, also with a Republican president, Donald Trump, I mean, they face a dilemma in terms of figuring out a way to alleviate these soaring costs. Trump has really struggled to figure out his position on this. Ultimately, what he's come down to is saying he wants to put money in the hands of Americans rather than in insurance companies. There was a Republican-backed proposal that would have moved the money from Obamacare subsidies into new healthcare savings accounts held by Americans that they could then use for health insurance purposes. That proposal didn't go anywhere. So here in the new year in January, we sit at a point where it's hard to see where there's going to be traction for Democrats and Republicans to come together for a solution. And ultimately, the one who is likely to face the most blowback from that is Trump. And, we already saw this issue play out in various special elections for seats in Congress that have been held over recent months, in which Democrats gained ground and really, overperformed in a lot of these races with this as one of the center point issues. And so you better believe heading into this midterm election, Democrats are going to be pointing to this issue over and over and saying, Trump and Republicans, let your health care prices rise.
Several House Republicans have broken with party leadership on healthcare. What does that signal about internal GOP tensions?
Well, they understand how volatile this issue is. And those four Republicans were each in competitive swing districts where they stand to possibly lose their races in 2026. And so I just laid out how this is a problematic issue for Republicans in midterms. Those four individuals and perhaps others to come are trying to distance themselves from it and say, hey, look, I'm trying to, extend these subsidies that expired. And so it'll be interesting to see whether there could be additional, more of your moderate Republicans, which are very few of them, but some of these, again, in these swing districts that are going to be the pivotal races that we watch come November 2026.
Joy, of course, healthcare isn't the only sore spot for the administration. You and your colleagues have laid out 2026 as a year full of pressure points for Trump. When we zoom out, what are some of the other big challenges hanging over his presidency right now?
Just generally, this feeling among Americans that prices are out of control and that the economy is not doing well. And that we've already seen Trump go on the road. He had some recent speeches and rallies in Pennsylvania, one in North Carolina, in which he's tried to make the economic case to Americans. Of course, this is largely how he is in the White House for a second term. Anyways, he ran on the idea of lowering costs, but it's been a struggle so far to achieve that. And I mentioned those special elections. Again, Democrats have outperformed from the 2024 presidential race by about 13, 15 points in each of those, a range of races. And that same kind of pattern plays out in the midterms. Republicans are going to lose control of the House, and Democrats will gain control. And the issue that Democrats are running on is affordability and lowering costs. And Trump has called the affordability argument from Democrats a Democratic hoax. He's been really frustrated by it because he looks at the numbers and says, hey, inflation is lower under my watch than it was under Biden. And he's correct in that assessment. It's funny. It's kind of like deja vu here. When I was covering Biden, the Biden White House was frustrated all the time about what they would point to these economic metrics and say, hey, look, we've had record job creation. We've had all these things. Yet in public polling, Americans were giving them a thumbs down on his handling of the economy. Well, 4 years later, it's the same thing now with Trump. And Trump, they've celebrated some recent positive economic metrics. But again, when we see the polling, Americans think the economy is doing poorly. And so to me, that's the big underlying challenge over the next year for Trump as we head into the midterms. And his instinct is always, this is the best economy America's ever seen, et cetera. So I don't know if that kind of approach is going to do well here before those midterm races. And so I think that's the biggest challenge that Trump faces.
Another government funding deadline is looming on January 30th. Joy, do you think Congress has the political will to pass something that carries the country through the end of the fiscal term this time, especially now that the ACA subsidies have expired and that's no longer a point of negotiation?
Yeah, I think it's much more likely that there is more of a resolution early on here that prevents another shutdown. I don't think there's any appetite for that from either side. With the ACA situation, well, not really resolved because nothing was ever passed on it, but essentially you're no longer facing that deadline. Democrats don't necessarily have anything policy wise that they want to dig in on. I don't think either side wants to get blamed for another shutdown in this midterm election year. So we'll see where it goes. I would never, bank on Congress 100% getting this done without any fireworks. But there's a much greater likelihood that we don't see a repeat of the situation from a few months ago.
Lawmakers passed just 61 laws in 2025, far below historical norms. How does that level of difficulty, some might say dysfunction, shape what Trump can realistically accomplish in 2026?
Well, he's increasingly becoming a lame duck president. I mean, you could define that in various ways, but he is, you already seen this with Republicans kind of looking to beyond him to the 2028 race, where you have folks like JD Vance or Ted Cruz, various folks already kind of circling around, sizing up their possible election runs. And you saw Republicans in Congress defy Trump with the voting for the release of the Epstein files. And so his influence in some ways is already, chipping away a little bit. He still has, Republican control of the Senate and House. And so to pass anything, this is the final year to potentially do it because, again, I mean, I think there's a strong possibility of the Democrats could take control of the House and maybe even the Senate. So this is kind of the final stretch potentially of Trump's term to get meaningful uh, legislation passed. But of course, there's such a razor thin margin in the House, and you have some House members, like for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's going to be officially gone from her seat. That leaves a vacancy for a little while. Again, that just makes that margin tighter.
Trump is pursuing peace talks in Ukraine, trying to hold a ceasefire in Gaza. How much control does the U.S. actually have over those outcomes?
Well, Trump's finding out he doesn't have a lot of control really on the outcome in Ukraine, especially, for example. He's often talked about he thought that would be the easiest international conflict to solve of all of the ones that kind of fell on his plate when he entered the White House. But he's really been, I think, surprised by how much Putin has been unwilling to listen to Trump's push for a peace deal and has continued on with that war. I don't know if there's a huge blowback here in America for not getting that that war solved. But Trump has often talked about himself as this peace president. He wanted the Nobel Peace Prize, et cetera. And this war hanging out there is definitely a thorn on and a blemish on that resume that he wants.
And Joey, what are the ramifications if Trump fails to maintain peace in Gaza?
Well, I mean, I think it would be a big disappointment for his administration and really kind of an embarrassment after, he went to Israel in October and really hailed this deal. There were signs of, peace in the Middle East everywhere, this kind of imagery, pageantry that he displayed. And if it quickly dissolves, it's going to really undercut everything that the administration had put forward then. And so each time there are these skirmishes that pop up in Gaza and this continued fighting, raises the possibility that, this definitely, and reminds us this very much is a fragile ceasefire. And so it's definitely in the U.S. interest and Trump's interest to try to limit, that fighting and make sure the ceasefire is an enduring one.
The Epstein document releases continue to surface Trump's name without allegations of wrongdoing. Do you think this will continue to haunt Trump in 2026, or is it possible it could finally fade away?
I don't think it will fade away, and I think it is likely to hang over him. It's been sort of the story that Trump has not been able to run away from in this past year, and now into the new year, it seems to be one that's sticking around. And yeah, it's unclear how many more documents might be pushed out by the Justice Department. But I mean, I think for every time there's a number of redactions or pages of documents that are withheld, I think that gives critics of Trump to push back and say that ask why these were redacted and demand that the full account of the Epstein files that were part of the investigation be released. Until there's an exhaustive disclosure of all those files, Democrats are going to make sure this continues to hang over the president and continue to express doubt about why all the files were not released.
The Supreme Court could soon rule on Trump's tariffs. Why is that decision so central to his economic agenda?
Well, Trump has really hung his entire economic agenda and really a lot of his foreign policy on these tariffs that he imposed on imports from countries across the world. He's used this as a bargaining chip with other foreign leaders. And he's also made the case to Americans that, this is his way that he's going to rebuild manufacturing in the United States. And he relied on a federal law that allows presidential emergency powers to be able to unilaterally issue these tariffs. And if the Supreme Court rules against him, he will essentially, the high court will say he doesn't have that power that he's said he has. So, he could find other ways to reissue these tariffs, but it's a more complicated, thorny process that would lack that immediacy that Trump prefers in order to say, hey, we're going to put a 25% tariff on this country, et cetera. And it could even result in having to, essentially pay back companies that have the government has been collecting this tariff revenue from, which, is in the hundreds of, millions of dollars. So, there would be a huge practical sort of repercussion there too. And so, as for Trump's entire economic agenda is really kind of hanging in the balance as we await what the Supreme Court does here. And even though conservatives have a 6-3 majority on the court, we heard several of them express skepticism about Trump's power in this regard. And I think, that's why you've heard Trump publicly try to pressure the court so many times here is they recognize that this really could get overturned. And so, you've already seen the president, express concern about that possibility.
Joey Garrison is a White House correspondent for USA Today. So good to have you on, Joey. Thanks for coming back.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.